Abbey House in Abbey Road, off the New Market Road, was built about 1580 from the remnants of Barnwell Priory, established in 1112 by Payne Peveril to house 30 Augustinian canons. Said to have had a church 200 feet long, the priory profoundly influenced life in Cambridgeshire during the Middle Ages. A house of Benedictine nuns was established in what is now Jesus Lane, and the nuns of St. Radegund built a large church which serves in part as the beautiful chapel of Jesus College. Barnwell Priory, the oldest and most wealthy of the religious houses in Cambridge, surrendered to the university and the king in 1538 when the houses of the friars were dissolved. In 1714, Jacob Squire Butler, a famous Cambridge character, inherited the Abbey estate. 6 feet 4 inches tall, a graduate who became a barrister and who engaged in numerous lawsuits, he called himself Old Brighton in his old age because of his many strenuous fights for what he considered to be his rights. Once, in an attempt to re-establish the ancient custom that decreed that anything still standing in the age-old fairground on the 24th of August could be trampled down by stall-holders, and at booths not cleared away by Michaelmas Day could be demolished. He drove his carriage through piles of crockery. Among his other eccentricities, long before his death at the age of 84 in 1765, Squire Butler had an enormous oak coffin made for himself, and at his funeral this coffin was lowered into a vault and a smaller, leaded coffin containing his body placed inside it. But all this does not seem to have prevented his ghost from walking. Some years ago, there were repeated reports of the appearance of the unmistakable form of Squire Butler, who died in the house. Those who encountered the tall, fierce-looking figure always mentioned the dark green wool coat with gold-braided edges. And from independent and separate but corroborating reports, a picture has emerged of a lanky, overbearing figure in the green thigh-length coat with gold buttons and heavy cuffs, a satin-embroidered waistcoat, green wool breeches, and black leather shoes with metal buckles. On his head, he wore a black felt tricorn hat with gold braid edge, and he sported a long, thin cane walking stick. Such a figure was apparently encountered many times within the old gabled house he knew so well. The Gray Lady Ghost, sometimes referred to as a lady in a gray cloak, is believed to have been one of the nuns of St. Radegund, who came to the abbey to meet her lover, an Austin friar. Her ghost, a hesitant figure, was usually seen in the area of the tall iron gate set in the gray stone wall, and on the age-old path at the back of the house amid the moldering stones of the vanished abbey. She was reportedly seen once in 1968 and twice in 1969. This report was written in 1984, so I suppose that wasn't terribly long ago. The ghostly white lady may have a similar provenance. Possibly her presence within the present part timber and part brick house stems from some long-forgotten errand of mercy or act of charity. For most often the white lady ghost used to be seen in one of the bedrooms. A typical example of the reported appearance of this presence has been provided by the children of Dr. Gray of Emmanuel College, who complained after the clergy had exorcised the house, that they were no longer tucked up in bed by the kind lady. Either or both of these poor ladies may have come to the house by means of an underground tunnel from the old nunnery of St. Radegund, now Jesus College, to meet with a monk who was also a lover of the ladies. Some evidence for such a tunnel is provided by the presence of a bricked-up archway in the cellar of the present house. It is said that at one time such a clandestine scheme was discovered, and that the erring nun was walled up alive. Small wonder she haunts the place. The phantom squirrel and the spectral hare have, it seems, been seen on the lawn at the front of the house. The squirrel, a red one, now extinct in Cambridgeshire, runs along the grey wall and drops to the ground. It always disappears when the person who sees it approaches and thinks that there is no escape for the handsome and seemingly well-fed animal. The hare, a large one with floppy ears, is also seen in the garden, often when snow is on the ground, and it sits watching whoever sees it, and then suddenly it is no longer there, and there are no traces of any animal on the snow. No one has ever suggested why these ghostly animals appear at certain places, but perhaps they are some kind of atmospheric photograph that recurs under certain climatic conditions and disappears when conditions alter by the close presence of a human being. Who can tell? The disembodied head and the eerie sound of a clanking chain are among the many manifestations reported some years ago. Professor F.J.M. Stratton, president of the Society for Psychical Research from 1953 to 1955, rented the Abbey House for a month and invited there many people who, like himself, took ghosts seriously. A former colonel of the Royal Engineers with the DSO and Legion of Honor to his credit, who was also a deputy lieutenant of the County of Cambridgeshire, director of the Solar Physics Observatory, former president of Caius College, and a fellow of the Royal Society. If he took the haunting seriously, which he certainly did, you may be sure that there was something in them. Well, I being Peter Underwood, also talked with Professor Stratton at an SPR gathering about the ghosts of Abbey House. The disturbances he and some of his guests experienced may have been less spectacular, but they were nonetheless inexplicable, and he told me of one incident when curious noises, including the sounds of muttering and singing, emanated from an empty room. In 1968, Mr. Young lived with his daughter in the largest part of the Abbey House, and he told Jimmy Wentworth Day, the renowned raconteur, author, and collector of ghostly happenings, that when his daughter, a level-headed young lady in the county health service, came to the house some 8 years earlier, the place was undoubtedly haunted. She heard strange noises night after night, sensed unseen presences repeatedly, and perhaps, what is even more significant, her dog would suddenly take to rushing to one corner of a paneled room, its hair on end, and bark furiously, for no apparent reason. Dogs, said Jimmy, I always regard as good witnesses. Mr. Young said the previous tenant had been a lady, and she also saw and felt some very frightening presences. She was glad to leave the place. Earlier still, in the 1920s, the occupant had been old Mr. Asham, a descendant of Roger Asham, and he had welcomed Jimmy Wentworth Day and half a dozen undergraduate friends to the house, regaled them with stories of his many weird and frightening experiences, and allowed them to sit up one night in the old house, all by themselves. It was his wife, who had been terrified almost out of her wits by the sudden and ghastly appearance at chest level of the apparition of a woman's head. Deathly white, without any body or arms or legs, it hovered in midair at the foot of her bed. Once, well, you might put such an experience down to a dream or hallucination, but Mr. Asham saw the awful form on 3 occasions, always in the same room but in different positions, and even in mid-afternoon, as she entered the bedroom to fetch something, the form always hovered for a few moments, swaying slightly, backwards and forwards, and from side to side, as though it found difficulty in remaining in one position, and then, with a curious dip that always caught Mrs. Asham by surprise, the frightful appearance disappeared. Before the Ashams moved into the house, I was told, the 2 previous tenants both left the place in a great hurry, one of them at 2 o'clock in the morning. Neither ever returned to the haunted house. More recently, 1984, poltergeist-like phenomena were reported, with various occupants and visitors complaining of indistinct forms or presences moving about their bedrooms at night in the dark, of sheets and bedclothes being suddenly twitched off the beds, and of groans and raps and rustling noises that had no rational explanation, and the undoubted movement of very heavy furniture. After 3 local clergymen visited the house and exorcised the place with holy water and prayers, most of the uninvited and unwelcome guests seemed to depart, but still, especially when the autumn afternoons draw in and the shadows lengthen around the long front of the house, an odd shadow or movement is noticed somewhere within or outside this lovable, warm old house, and the heart of a watcher skips a beat. Are some of the ghosts of yesteryear returning again to their old haunts? This question is left unanswered, as that is the end of the report of Abbey House in this publication, This Haunted Isle by Peter Underwood. I continue after I bring more light to my page, as the sun seems to be fleeting. Alderley Edge, Cheshire, or Cheshire, to nobody in particular. Alderley Edge. Some of the finest views in the whole of the country can be found looking down on the Cheshire Plain from the Edge, once the site of a Neolithic settlement and a prehistoric copper mining. It is a beautiful and peaceful place, but some visitors have found it vaguely disturbing, and it may be that on rare occasions there is something here that cannot easily be explained. There was the little girl who ran back to her parents with a story about a little man with a long beard and no clothes. A tale that may have had a perfectly logical explanation were it not for a couple who were lazily and quietly enjoying each other's company one balmy summer day, when they both saw a similar figure emerge from the trees, pass close to where they lay, and then suddenly disappear in front of their eyes. There is the evidence, too, of a retired police officer and his wife, who were having a picnic and became aware that they were being watched from some nearby bushes. With long years of police training behind him, the man idly got up off the ground and slowly walked away in the opposite direction, and then circled around to come up behind the watcher or watchers. Sure enough, he saw a short, long-haired man who appeared from the back to be naked. As he quietly approached the still figure, he suddenly found himself completely alone. One moment, the figure was a few yards in front of him. The next, it had completely disappeared. For all his professional experience and keen policeman's eye, he was completely baffled as to any possible explanation. He and his wife now choose other picnic sites. A friend of mine who is psychic says there is an expectant atmosphere at Alderley Edge, and she believes that very occasionally, when all the necessary ingredients are present, it is possible for some people to see some of the inhabitants of this area who lived here long, long ago. There is also a tradition that a pagan burial mound exists in the vicinity, and that Alderley Edge is one of the places where the ghosts of King Arthur and his knights have been seen. Certainly, Alderley Edge and its surrounding area has occult associations going back for centuries. The great cliff, Pendle Hill, where modern witchcraft practices have been reported, is famous for its mysterious wizard who is commemorated in the name of a local inn, and the inscription beside a well at the base of the sandstone outcrop says, "Drink of this and take thy fill, for thy water falls by the wizard's will." Drink of this and take thy fill, for the water falls by the wizard's will. The well water was renowned for promoting fertility, and those who study such matters say a number of ley lines intersect here. The story of a wizard and legends of King Arthur intermingle in an age-old story that is to be found in other places traditionally associated with the Arthurian legend. Here it is said that one day, 300 or more years ago, a farmer sold a white horse to a bearded stranger who conducted him through the woods to a large rock face, which opened to reveal King Arthur and his knights and their white steeds, all sleeping until the day that England would need them again. They were short of one horse, and the farmer took the purse of gold, left the animal in exchange, and made a hasty escape, the cliff closing magically behind him. An equally unlikely story tells of an enormous mere that once stretched from Alderley Edge to High Lair, and of a mermaid who was repeatedly seen, left high and dry by the vanished waters, but oddly and inexplicably, she only seems to have been seen at Easter time. I have an idea. I want to continue with more of these, but I think it would be pretty cool if I would look up some pictures from these locations, although there's no way that I can definitely sync up maybe. We'll see what I can do. Perhaps I can do a slideshow for you. a sort of, what do you call it, PowerPoint presentation from these old British ghost stories. Well, now that I've said so much, let's see what we can do.